I want to talk about pain. It's on a lot of people's minds right now because of COVID, and we're all going, a lot of us, almost all of us, are going through it in one way or another in life, typically, but especially right now, or we're anticipating pain coming, all the things we're hearing. I want to talk about pain, but I want to use the story of a sword and the blacksmith who makes it and who makes them, sort of as a way to get there, and to speak about pain and why it's not, doesn't have to be a bad thing. God can actually, in God's hands, pain can be a good thing. I was reading Deep Work, which I've maybe talked about before, maybe even put up before in front of the screen. Then I'll probably do a sort of reading in exile clip on it, but I'm reading it, and in one chapter, so he's talking about deep work. He's making the case for the fact that we, of course, we're in a culture that militates against deep work on almost every level, more vociferously probably than any culture in history. Haste, appear to be productive even if you're not producing anything, and emails and calls and traveling and so on and so forth. COVID has changed that some. So anyway, as a Christian in particular, I'm really interested in deep work, and I'll do another post in a second on why that's the case. In short, it involves God's call in His Word to us to meditate, which is very much a deep work, and how that needs to be central to our lives. But anyway, I just want to focus on this blacksmith. It's an example of a guy that's basically committed his life, or at least his craft, his workmanship, to deep work. And he talks about how this is a guy named Rick Fuhrer. He's a blacksmith, and he has his own company called Door County Forge Works, and he does everything by hand with ancient tools as a blacksmith. And it's stuff that these days you can do by machine very, very quickly. He takes his time. He's learned his craft. He's honing his craft. And that time and that painstaking detail and that effort and that sweat and that creativity and that labor is part of why Rick, this blacksmith, has chosen to do what he's done, because that's it's satisfying, and there's so much more that goes into it and that you get out of it than you can even articulate. And so PBS did a documentary in 2012 on it. He said a few things, though, that are the reason I wanted to talk to you about it, that really struck me, pierced me, maybe, to stay with the sword metaphor or the sword story. He said he's talking about hitting an ingot. Let me read a bit about it. It says he's in his barn, he's doing his work. The setting is idyllic, but the work can seem at first encounter brutish. In the documentary, Fuhrer is trying to recreate a Viking-era sword. He begins by using a 1,500-year-old technique to smelt crucible steel. And here's the deal. He says the result is an ingot not much bigger than 3 or 4 stacked smartphones. So imagine four smartphones stacked on top of each other, just a solid bit of steel. It's called an ingot. This dense ingot must then be shaped and polished into a long and elegant sword blade. So to go from something that's as big as 4 smartphones stacked on top of each other like a brick of steel, you pound that out by hand with a hammer, putting it in the fire, taking it out, pounding it, putting it in the fire, taking it out, pounding it. Precision, hard work, precision work, over and over and over again. That's what I want to talk about. How do you get from that ingot to a sword? Now, here's how. This is Rick's commentary on this. He says this part, the initial breakdown from the ingot to the sword, okay? From this lump of potential material, raw material, to something that a brain and a hand and skill make into something useful, beautiful, deadly, all right? He says this part, the initial breakdown, is terrible. The narrator reveals that it will take 8 hours of this hammering to complete the shaping from an ingot to a sword blade. Every hit is forceful and is carefully controlled. And Rick says you have to be very gentle with it or you will crack it. It's precision work, it's difficult work, it's controlled work, it's careful work. It just made me think, it's a simple illustration but an effective one, about Ephesians 2:10 in particular, and God's work on us, and how in Ephesians Paul says that we are God's workmanship, created what? In Christ Jesus for good works that God's prepared beforehand. But the fact that right there, that workmanship, we are the things that he's pounding on. Like C.S. Lewis says in The Problem of Pain, we're not, unfortunately, when we're going through pain, we feel it's unfortunate that we are not something that God cares less about. Not a masterpiece, but really like a pencil sketch, sort of like the pencil sketches that you see in Leonardo da Vinci's sketchbooks, just kind of sketched out quickly and then put away, moved past, maybe refer to it in the future, maybe not, sort of just to get an idea down. We're not things that God just wants to get one of his ideas down about. We're eternal creatures that he's made for himself, and that he's going to work out until we're like Jesus, until we are holy or ruined, one or the other. Hellions or with him in heaven, like his son, fixated on his son, beautiful like his son. And that isn't easy. We are ingots. And not to mention, ingot doesn't have sin and evil and rebellion in it. Not to mention all that. God has got to, it's not a fluffy journey. It's not marshmallows and unicorns. God has got to pound us, put us in the fire, strike us over and over. But it's controlled. It's precision work, it's for a purpose, and it's to make us beautiful. And it hurts. Most of the time, the effective work hurts. We are his workmanship. We're his workmanship. We're not a pencil sketch. We are masterpieces. And so I just want to encourage you that God, if you are indeed in Christ, God is working all things for good. Here's another book that I'll throw out in front of you. I've done it before. I'll do it again. But All Things for Good by Thomas Watson, one of my favorite Puritan writers. He's the master of the word picture and the illustration. But that's from Romans 8:28. God, we are his work. He uses all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And a lot of times it's through pain, it's through hardship, it's through COVID, it's through questions, it's through the economy falling out, bottoming out, the bottom dropping out of the economy rather. It's through you getting a pay cut, losing your job, going on furlough, getting sick, being scared, being quarantined. God has you where he has you for a reason, and he's pounding away, and it's because he cares about you and you're his masterpiece. If indeed you're in Christ, and if you're not, I want to encourage you to flee to Christ, because in Christ, everything that happens to us, there's a purpose to, there's a reason for it, and it's a good reason. Outside of Christ, it's just we're heading for disaster. Is the short and easy way to put it. Love you guys, and that's it. That's all I got for this one.